Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week, we will be discussing a recently discovered malware that was actually able to shut down endpoint detection and response software. But before we begin, what exactly is endpoint detection and response in the first place? Also known as EDR, and what I'm going to refer to it for the rest of this episode because it's shorter, it's a type of security software that sits on an endpoint. An endpoint refers to a device that an end user would typically be using, so a laptop, a mobile device, or even an Internet of Things device. And it monitors for cybersecurity threats. If a threat is detected, it may have response capabilities to contain the threat. It sounds kind of like an antivirus, but an antivirus typically scans for known malware, whereas EDR is able to detect abnormal behavior. Still, it's pretty common to deploy both, and malware being able to not only bypass but actually stop the EDR from running gives an attacker a major advantage. So, how does this malware work? The malware was discovered initially in May of 2024, when a ransomware case was being investigated, and surprise, a new strain of malware seemed to play a part in the attack. It was named EDR Killshifter by Sophos, as security researchers at Sophos were the first to discover it, and the malware works in a pretty interesting way. When the malware is deployed on a target, it's not just the malware that's deployed on the target. A legitimate but vulnerable driver is also deployed. A driver is a program on a computer that controls a type of device or some other kind of automation. It acts to connect peripheral hardware, like a mouse or a keyboard, to software, which allows you to use your mouse, keyboard, monitor, speakers, microphone, anything that you may connect. Drivers can also contain vulnerabilities just like any other type of software. And the vulnerable driver that the attackers deployed in this case actually allowed them to escalate privileges and disable the EDR software. Since the drivers used are real, legitimate drivers that someone may install, the EDR did not detect anything unusual going on. And there are legitimate reasons that you may need to install drivers separately. In fact, uninstalling and reinstalling drivers is a pretty common fix for issues with peripheral devices that I used to do all the time. Some people in gaming spaces may also be familiar with needing to update their NVIDIA or AMD drivers to get them working properly, or because the old version of the drivers has a vulnerability in it and they need to grab the latest from the website. This would typically occur automatically, but sometimes you need to do it manually. The use of vulnerable drivers in types of attacks is also not completely unheard of. In fact, this method is known as the Bring Your Own Vulnerable Driver, or BYOVD method. This may sound like a difficult threat to face, but the way Sophos discovered this malware was actually due to it failing to execute on a target system. Still, in response to this discovery, Sophos recommended turning on any tamper protection in any EDR solution you have, if that's offered. Strong access control is also recommended, since this attack can only work if privileges are escalated. That means having separate admin accounts with unique, complex passwords that you're not always logged into. Please don't just always use your device as an admin user. Escalate to your admin user account when it's necessary, and when it's not, you don't need those admin privileges. There should also be password changes on any default accounts, including the default administrator account. The group responsible for this malware strain is called RansomHub, which is a group that started showing up in 2024, but they're suspected to be an offshoot or possibly a rebranding of a different ransomware group called Knight. It's actually pretty common for ransomware groups to rebrand and reappear after vanishing. This can be for a number of reasons, but is typically because they're getting a bit too much attention from authorities. Even though this malware was made by RansomHub, the Scattered Spider group is also taking advantage of this ransomware. You may remember our friend Scattered Spider for hacking MGM and Caesars last year. Scattered Spider is suspected to be a rather large global community rather than a single ransomware group, so it's possible RansomHub is simply under them now. As cyber defense mechanisms evolve, so do attackers. The important part is trying to both keep up and stay ahead of attackers as new methods for gaining access to and exploiting machines are created. If you're interested in reading the full technical details on this malware, I recommend checking out the first link in my sources paste bin, which is the write-up by Sophos. Thank you to Sophos for providing that write-up, as well as the Hacker News, Bleeping Computer, Tech Radar, and Dark Reading for information on this type of attack, and your reporting on the subject. And of course, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime. My name is Chloe Tonis, and until next time, stay secure.